My wildest prediction for the future is that everyone is going to be using some form of neural interface, and that will allow them to have a very seamless way to interact with the world around us.
I'm going to try and avoid using the word sort of mind blowing, but it kind of is.
And we power neuroscience experiments of all forms in 140 plus countries. And what's really interesting about that is we've seen how the brain changes in the context of your lived experience.
3, 2, 1. Are you interested in trying a wireless headset that lets you interact with the world by reading your mind? This is not science fiction. It was invented more than a decade ago by Australian entrepreneur, inventor, and businesswoman Tan Le. In a time when we're only just beginning to discuss brain trips, Tan Le is here to talk about the next breakthroughs in brain technology from her company, Emotive, and of course, to share her wildest prediction. Welcome to the show, Tan.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
I'm fascinated by this. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. It's sort of I'm going to try and avoid using the word sort of mind blowing, but it kind of is. But let's kick off. Like, what's your sort of biggest prediction, your wildest prediction for the future?
My wildest prediction for the future is that everyone is going to be using some form of neural interface, and that will allow them to have a very seamless way to interact with the world around us. So think about all of the devices that have come online as part of the Internet of Things. Think about the explosion of information that's available to all of us today. We will be able to seamlessly interact with that directly to the center of our own control command center, right? And we'll be able to very, very efficiently interact with the world. And as part of that neural interface, it will also help us extend the health and well-being of our brain, because as we use these neural interfaces, we'll actually start to collect better data, better models, and better biomarkers around early indications of what we need to do to preserve the longevity, health, and resilience of our brain. The other part of that prediction is that these neural interfaces will actually be non-invasive, and they'll look like the headphones that you're wearing now, Tom. They might look like a pair of glasses. They'll be integrated into everyday devices that we're already familiar with.
Yeah, I went on your website and I looked at some of the devices that you're already making, and they look like very attractive sort of consumer electronics. So it seems though
Yes,
you're
thank you.
already sort of in the process of
Yeah,
making
well,
things
the
that help you
latest
to work.
device that we have is, a pair of headphones, and they're very easy to wear, right? So, these are in-ear devices that we also support form factors like the over-the-ear headphones that you have on. But I can imagine us being able to integrate the sensing technologies into glasses, into helmets, VR systems. Over time, we'll probably get them into softer fabrics as well, so that you could actually wear them as a cap or a hat or fashionable product. So it's a very exciting frontier where the challenge with this technology is around, one, being able to really comfortably measure and robustly measure the signals from the brain. And the other part is the decoding of the electrical signals, because these signals are inherently very noisy and attenuated, right? We're collecting data about the brain, which from the brain, which is the result of neurons firing inside our head, but we have to contend with the layer of skull and then hair and skin and all of that. So by the time we actually get to the surface measurement, it's a weakened signal, and we're not looking at the direct result of a single or groups of neurons. We're looking at fluctuations, right? So the decoding itself is actually one of the biggest challenges in this space. But I think you're right. The form factor is already evolving substantially, and we're getting closer to a world where people will be quite comfortable wearing these devices.
And the technique being used, I think, is called electroencephalography. Is that right? I might be
Well
saying that
done.
wrong.
Yes,
I've
you
been
did
practicing that all
perfectly.
morning. And that's the kind of act of detecting sort of electrical signals that are generated by sort of neurons firing and stuff like that.
That is
Um,
exactly right. And
and,
so
and does
it's
this
your
work?
brain's
I mean,
emitting, yeah, this signal anyway, right? So we're not sending any signals in. EEG for short is a basically just measuring the electrical fluctuations that can be observed on the surface, but we don't we're actually not sending any signals back into the brain. It's just measuring what's already naturally emitting from all of that neural activity in your head.
And does this work? Because I remember being humiliated, I think, at CES about 8 years ago, because there was some kind of drone that I had to control with my brain waves and
Yes,
sort of wish it to move left and wish it to move right. And it
yes.
turned out that my brain power was in no way significant enough to do that. I'm hoping that the problem was not me; it was the machine. Um,
Uh,
are we now getting to the point where this works?
I think one of the challenges, which I alluded to, is the decoding of the signals. You are dealing with a lot of noise. And so, if we don't get a clean enough signal from the brain itself, it's going to be very, very difficult to discern the very subtle changes that your brain makes when you're trying to think left or right. Right. So it is a challenge. The models are getting much better. And so one of the benefits that we've seen in recent years with advancements in machine learning, in AI, is that there are better ways, newer modern methods for decoding data and signals, especially if you have massive amounts of it. And so the AI is able to discern very subtle patterns, changes in electrical fluctuations that is not really easily perceptible, but you need a huge amount of data in order to find those features. And so, part of the challenge when you're using some of this early technology is that the data that we've been able to amass up until that point in time is relatively small. And so, the machine learning algorithms are a little bit more hard, right? They're a blunt instrument. And so sometimes the experience is not as compelling as you would like them to be, because you're like, what? I'm thinking right. I'm thinking right. Why is it not moving right? Clearly,
Is,
I'm
is,
thinking right.
is part of the problem that these are devices that you put on rather than the things that are kind of within your brain? Because there's obviously kind of movements like Neuralink and I think Synchron, which are
Yes.
kind of chips almost that are sort of
Yeah,
implanted in your
so
brain.
a lot of the invasive technology that gets through the layer of hair, which is a pretty big challenge, and gets, even if it's just not quite through the skull, but right just under the skin and into the it already makes a very, very significant difference, right? In actually, like the neural lace and the meshes that we're starting to see, they're really interesting because you don't have to contend as much with as much noise, and you're actually getting a lot more signal. And so the decoding is a little bit is a lot more stronger in terms of its fidelity.
And what are the kind of use cases for this? Because it's one of those technologies that seems amazing and this huge sort of platform. And then you kind of wonder, well, what do you do with this? Like, what does a kind of day in the life wearing this device do? What does it look like? What companies can kind of be built on top of that
Yeah,
platform?
so I think initially the kinds of, the way that we think about the go to market motion for a mass consumer adoption is to start with brain health. A lot of the wearables today that we wear to track our physical well being exists, and there is a large contingent of consumers that's starting to, that really cares about their physical well-being, and I think that that will extend to a much more holistic view of how well your not only does your body function, but how well does your brain function, right? And so, can we actually start to extend those wearables into tracking cognitive and mental fitness and well-being? So, I think that's the next. Kind of adjacent step, and we believe that those will be the first wave of devices that will come out that will kind of support this sort of brain and cognitive fitness type device. And then once you've got a platform where people are already using these devices, and the way we think about it is that you want to add these features to a product that already has a utility. So it's going to be much harder for someone to buy a device that only exclusively measures brain activity for the purposes of improving brain health. But if you're already wearing a pair of headphones, if you're already wearing glasses to, uh, you know, interface with your computer, then being able to also have the ability to measure and track your brain well-being, that's an easier step, right? So that's the first phase, is just to get the sensing technology into the hands of more and more consumers so that they can initially get to benefit from these early markers that help them improve their brain fitness. Beyond that, that's when you can start to create an ecosystem of use cases around that. So whether it be selection of music that is supports your mood or improves your cognitive performance, or whether it's selection of music lists that really appeals to you, that's a very natural extension, right? If you think about wearing headphones, what do you typically use it for? If you're looking at listening to books, can you recommend books that people would like? Can I pause the book naturally when I'm starting to fall asleep so that it doesn't continue to play? Or I don't have to set an arbitrary timer of turn it off in 30 minutes. I can actually let it play while I'm still paying attention. And then when I'm distracted, just pause, right? Listening to podcasts, same thing, right? So being able to dynamically understand the cognitive state of the individual, and then having the world and the application spaces that we interface with every day really understand and personalize that experience for us in a way that we are not just setting, very crude, start stop, based on a time limitation. Even things like, I like to work for a certain period of time and take a break, walk around, but those things can be very arbitrary. If you say, okay, I want to do a 45-minute focus and then 15-minute walk, it's much better if you can actually say, well, hey, if I'm in the zone and my brainware is picking up that I'm still working hard, let's just extend that for a little bit more and then go for a 15-20 minute walk, right? So I think it's really nice to be able to understand the state that the person is in, so that we're not just setting arbitrary pauses, stops throughout the day, all in the hopes that we will actually preserve our brain. Because one of the fundamental reasons why I started this company at the very beginning is because, brain health and neurological impairments affect so many people, right? I have a family of 3, my husband, myself, and my daughter, and the stats are not good. So 1 in 3 people will be affected by some sort of neurological condition in their life. That's a terrifying statistic, to think that out of our family, our little tiny family, one of us will be affected by something that hopefully we can do something about, if we can start to track our brain early and start to look after it in the same way we've kind of protected our cardiovascular health.
I was going to say, it's so interesting to me that we are so incapable currently of measuring these things in an objective way.
Yes.
I've been fairly interested in the quantified health movement for a while, and I've never really sort of got that stuck into it, because after a while it became sort of paranoia inducing. But I got an aura ring and it told me how well I slept. And I kept on thinking that actually the way I feel and the measurements for sleep don't really correlate that well. And
Yes.
this idea of knowing that you actually are tired rather than feeling tired, or knowing that you're not in a good work zone because you've got data to support it. It's a very
Yes.
sort of empowering notion. And
Well,
you can
it's
start
really
to see how all
nice.
this data can come together as well. So
Absolutely. And I think one of the nice things is that even when it comes to business, right? Even if you do A/B testing, we're just not good at predicting what's going to work better, right? The data will tell us. And sometimes, I think I feel pretty good, but the reality is my brain is accustomed to working longer, harder, under more stressful conditions. And the problem is that you get used to it. And unless you have an objective measurement that says, hey, you know what, you are having sustained elevated levels of stress for this amount of time during your day, you actually don't notice it. It's much harder to pick up the mental strain on your brain than it is jumping on a scale and saying, "Oh,
yeah,
maybe I won't eat that that donut today." But
yeah.
that's really, it's much harder to pick up, because we do become very accustomed to a certain level of stress on our brains, and it's not easy to measure. We're not good at detecting when it's too much, and so having measurement that helps us understand exactly and what's going on, and quantifying that so that we can make better choices throughout the day that kind of over time really make a big impact on how our brains well-being actually stacks up for a much longer life.
And when you think about this kind of future vision, this kind of wild future,
Yeah.
you're thinking that the main use that people would have for these devices would be to track their everyday well-being, to know when they're in the zone. It would be more of a kind of measurement approach rather than an interface. So
I think that's
you
where it's
can
going to
sort of turn the
start.
TV on with it, but that's
So
not the kind of
I think that's where it's going to start. But
yeah.
as we've seen with the breathtaking possibilities with AI, I think one of the things that we will start to see is the convergence of these technologies, where you will start to see cognitive co-pilots, where you will understand when the person is actually confused and you can or can't remember a particular word, and the co-pilot can step in and fill in the blanks, right? So it will become a much more symbiotic relationship with AI. Even the feedback loop with between the human and the AI is going to be much more seamless. So imagine right now I might type in a set of prompts. The AI will generate a series of, let's say, text, but as I'm reading the text, I'm already thinking it's not quite the gist of what I want. If it can actually understand the emotional tone that I'm looking for, if it can actually understand this is what I actually mean, and it starts to move the content closer to what I'm looking for, that will be very helpful, even in terms of guardrails. Right now, if I say, "Hey, create an image of X," it doesn't really know how that image actually affects the person. But if there is a feedback loop that allows AI to understand that, you know what, this is a threshold where we're not going to pass because it's actually causing undue strain, stress, anxiety on a person. These images have a certain content that's not positive for an individual, then it can start to create better thresholds, right? It's hard to do that now, but the models don't exist where there is a good alignment between AI and a person's cognitive and emotional intent and well-being. And so I think that these worlds will start to converge, especially when the devices become more common and people are wearing these devices to allow them to understand and have data on all of this as they're interfacing with their world. And so absolutely, to begin with, it will start with something like that's quite benign, like a health wearable, but over time the possibilities will kind of evolve into much more of a neural interface that will allow you to truly seamlessly interact with your world, right? So as I mentioned at the very beginning, I think that you start with the neural interface because it's very exciting for people in terms of the concept, but really ultimately, I don't want to just wear an interface if it's not going to help me live a better life and allow me to enjoy my old age as well. If there's the possibility of that, I'd love to use the technology. And so for us, it's there's two benefits of these neural interfaces. One is the convenience, of being able to use an interface with all of the appliances around you and the information around you. It will take time because, unless we're talking about the brain meshes and chips, which are um, that have greater resolution. On the non-invasive part of this technology framework, I think it does require a significant amount of data. We are starting to see some very interesting performance, but it's still early days for this technology as a full-blown interface. Because if you think about our expectations as consumers, we expect a lot from an interface.
Is this why you're kind of putting to practice things like I think there's a coffee shop in Belfast that you're taking over. Is the goal there a kind of data collection exercise to
So
ensure that
we
you
we
can
have
learn more?
been the way that we think about it is, we haven't done a lot in the consumer space. That's the
Mhm.
next phase for the business. So far, our goal has been to really make neuroscience research democratize and contextualize so that people can essentially, if you have a question about what happens to your brain when you do X, you have tools that allow you to measure the brain in the context of the real world. And we've been doing that for a decade now, and we power neuroscience experiments of all forms in 140 plus countries. And what's really interesting about that is we've seen how the brain changes in the context of your lived experience, right? So your brain isn't just it's an incredible system that is completely responsive to the world in which you and the environment in which you lived and your lived experience. If you live in a remote part of the world, the network connectivity in your brain is going to look very different to someone who lives in Miami or the US, right? Or even in Europe. So I think that that's really exciting for us to have this collection of brain data that really represents the diversity that exists in our world. What we're doing from all of that empowerment of neuroscience research is that we do get a copy of that data in a de-identified manner that allows us to build better models in order to support the customers, right? So one of the things that our goal from day one has always been to really truly decode what happens in your brain using non-invasive measurement methods. And that requires, because it's a very noisy signal, as I mentioned, we need a huge amount of data in order to create models that can really overcome the problem, the challenge of what we term as subject variability, right? So the individual variation between humans, right? Every brain is different. And the intra-subject variability, where your brain, because it changes based on your lived experience, it evolves over the course of your life. So your brain today doesn't look the same as your brain even 3 months from now. So that creates a lot of challenge unless you have a lot of data in order to help inform the models. And so we've been doing that for a long time in order to create the platform for a much better decoder for how we would actually deal with non-invasive based measurements, right? And I think we're at the point now where we do have a lot of data from the community across many different dimensions of neuroscience research. But we also, some of the tools that we launched very early on were around brain-computer interfaces, right? So being able to move an object forward, left, right, turn it around, etc., spin it, make it disappear, just a whole host of things. But the idea with releasing that as a sandbox early is so that we could collect data on the variability that exists in how people think about these commands. We have a lot of them now, training data as well as you know usage data, and that allows us to improve the models. And I expect that probably within the next 12 months we're going to start to see some massive improvements in some of the neural interface type experiences that we're starting to roll out. So we've been very reticent to move into the mass market for the last 10 decades since we've been around, because we believe that consumers have a very high bar in terms of their level of expectations. And so it's fine to offer a solution that allows us to experiment and build our models. But once we're ready for prime time, that's when we make the shift. And we feel like this is that really interesting juncture where consumers are going to be able to wear devices that look and feel frictionless, and will have the models to support the kind of experiences that a consumer would expect from.
It almost feels a bit like the kind of the mapping stages of self-driving cars, where you can have the kind of core software there, but you need sort of millions of vehicles to drive around, taking millions of data points, and then have all of that data that then refines the model, that then allows more people to have access to those cars, which
Right.
then creates more data.
Yes.
And it kind of seems like you can measure so many things, but until you know how those things are correlated and what the causation is, it's quite hard to know what can come of it. Even
Exactly.
to the point where, to what extent can these devices read our minds and know what we're thinking?
Exactly. We're a
We
long
don't know.
way. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
a long way from being able to really read anyone's mind, but for a
yeah,
very specific set of commands that you
yeah.
use regularly, repeatedly, I think there's a very good likelihood that we'll be able to do those very robustly and seamlessly,
Yeah.
so that you'll be able
And at
to.
the moment, Emotive as a company, I think it describes itself as a kind of platform. So you're less interested in building the businesses on top of this, and you're more about providing the data and the understanding, and almost like an operating system or
Correct.
a software development kit where other companies get to sort of build on your foundations. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And because
Yeah.
you can imagine the use cases for this technology are so varied. And the way that we think about our business is that we are experts in measuring brain signals in the context of the real world. We've been doing that for a long time. All of the devices are self fitted by the user. That's a very big challenge to overcome, right? Being able to measure brain signals from a device that end users will use. They're not like neuroscientists generally. Then they won't spend the time, and so being able to really collect good quality brain data is one big challenge that we've solved for. The other area where we really excel is in the decoding of the brain signals, and so that we believe is ripe for a platform based approach where our partners can actually build a lot of different applications on top of the platform, whether it be to support sleep, whether it be to support performance, whether it be to support gaming, to support meditation. It really doesn't matter what the application space is because you're using your brain for a myriad of use cases, right? We use our brain for everything basically. And so there is so many things that we could use the platform for. It's just a matter of, we're not going to create all of those applications. We want to work with partners in order to make brain measurement available to those experiences.
I would say, and I don't normally say this, but any listeners or viewers, if you go to your websites, it's amazing how clearly you demonstrate all of the different possible use cases and the
Oh, thank
types of
you.
companies, yeah, that could benefit from this. I mean, are you at a stage where you kind of almost are welcoming conversations with companies that might want to access your technology, or is there
Absolutely.
anything that people listening might want to do to further this or to build on
No,
top of
I
your?
am really excited to work with partners, and I look forward to actually talking to anyone who is interested in partnering with Emotive to explore putting brain sensing into their products or to use brain sensing in and the decoding in their applications. So I'm very excited to talk to anyone. You can find me on LinkedIn. Send me a note to emotive.com. I am always open to conversations. We're a very collaborative organization.
It's been fantastic to have you on the show. I think it's one of those areas which could be so big and so profound and open up so many opportunities for the world. And we, at the moment, we almost have more questions than we do answers. And I think it's an amazing sort of pioneering journey that you're going on. So
The only thing that comes to mind that we didn't touch on, but we don't actually work in this area directly today as Emotive, but we do work with partners around is in the clinical space, right?
mm,
Electroencephalography has its roots in the medical field to look at a whole range of conditions, but I think as we start to move this technology into the consumer domain, there is an intersection point where consumer health starts to move into the realm of also supporting some of the clinical conditions as well, such as
mhm.
ADHD, autism, and we're starting to see some of that. But I think it's a pretty exciting space to be able to think that as long as people are willing to wear these devices, it can provide the foundation for much better measurement. So that, let's say, for example, you have epilepsy, it's actually hard to measure a seizure unless you're wearing a device on a continuous basis. But if you had a device that you're already wearing for work, for play, for relaxation, then it's and that already has robust EEG measurement, then you can start to see a world where a lot of these conditions that people may experience that are chronic will have better tools that can support them as well. And I think that's been a really exciting part of the possibility space that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but I think is very exciting as well.
I mean, it's particularly interesting because so many psychological conditions are diagnosed based on surveys.
Yes.
rather than actual objective measurements. So there's a whole tranche of conditions, everything from sort of autism to ADHD to OCD, where there is a sense of like, does this exist, or is it just people being spirited, or
Yeah,
is that just what it's
even
like to be seven?
conditions that have come up more recently, like long COVID, right? The brain fog
Yeah,
that exists.
yeah,
It's very difficult to quantify and measure for somebody who doesn't have that experience. But if you can actually see your baseline before, and you can actually see post COVID what how long you can sustain attention, how long you can actually work for
yeah,
before you kind of dip away,
yeah,
it's actually much more measurable, and you can actually start to see um, the impact of these conditions, and potentially look at ways to address them. So I do agree that a lot of these conditions today, where the base measurement is observation rather than measurement, there's a
yeah,
huge opportunity to support those conditions much better when we're
yeah.
able to have devices in the field that has greater engagement and usage from
Yeah. Or
the
even measurement in a clinical setting. It's one thing to see how
absolutely.
people perform with different probes aimed at their face, but to measure how they sleep or how they are at home and stuff is very different.
Yeah.
I think it's an amazing sort of pioneering journey that you're going on. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me.